Welcome to Hey Chaplain. My name is Chaplain Altic, and I'm a chaplain with the police department. I had a few extra minutes this week, and so I decided to give you an update episode. But instead of updating you on the state of the podcast, I thought I would update you on my volunteer work with the local police department. I am a patrol chaplain. I focus primarily on the patrol divisions in our city's police department, and I get called out to unattended deaths like homicides, suicides, accidental deaths, etc. This year, I'm making a concerted effort to encourage officers to talk after critical incidents, whether that's a brief 5-minute defuse or whether that is a more lengthy and formal debrief. It's still important that we talk about our trauma, and if I'm going to recommend that to others, then I need to do that for myself when I get called out on these different calls. So I asked my coworker at the church, Kaleb Sackett, if he would be willing to talk to me briefly about it, and with almost no preparation at all, he very graciously took some time out of his schedule to sit down with me for just a few minutes. And so here's Kaleb Sackett.
You go to a lot of roll calls, right?
Yes, I do.
That's something you do fairly regularly as a part of being a volunteer chaplain. Mm-hmm. You recently told me that there's a spiel that you've given at several of these roll calls in recent history.
Yeah, just this month.
So I was thinking, you love sharing wisdom and insight with cops. Why would you limit that to just, a few local patrol officers? Why wouldn't you want to share that with your bigger network on your podcast?
Why not put it on the podcast? Well, yeah, that's true. I don't do a lot of talking on my own podcast. I typically try to put the other person in the spotlight. But yes, I've gone to every roll call in our patrol divisions and done the same spiel.
What have you been telling your patrol officers that you see on a day in, day out basis?
Well, what I do is I go in and I said this. I was driving through town out in West Patrol, and I came across a scene that I had not been called to. I saw the police cars, I saw the lights. I was actually driving home, and I just happened upon it. And I ran into one of our sergeants, and she kind of had this look on her face like, "Oh, you're here already." And I'm like, "What's going on? I don't know what's happening." And it turned out it was the suicide of a teenager, and the young man had died by hanging, and it was pretty terrible. And so I went ahead and stayed on scene, and I engaged the family. I went to the officers. It wasn't especially traumatic with the body. The body had been cut down. That was difficult to see, but I think what got me on that scene were the family. Mm-hmm. The father was so traumatized he couldn't speak when I was talking to him, and that was incredibly difficult to see. But other than that bit of awfulness, it wasn't horrible compared to other scenes I've been on.
You've been on scenes like that before.
I've been on hundreds. And so we were standing there waiting for the scene to be processed with CSI and the detectives. And in fact, I think I was chatting with the detective when another officer who was listening to the radio, because I don't carry a radio, and he's listening to the radio and goes, "Hey, chap, they're talking about you." And I'm like, "What?" And there was confusion because I got called out to another suicide that was happening simultaneously in a different part of town.
Okay.
And so, but people were on the radio saying, "Well, he's here at the suicide." And it's like, okay, two different districts. And, there was some confusion, and they got it sorted out real quick. And I said, "Okay, let me finish up here, and then I'll drive across town to the other one." So I leave this one, which is one of the saddest suicide calls I've been on. And I drive across town, and it was a suicide by firearm. It was a shotgun suicide. And I've seen several of those, but this was unique because this was a female. And those are kind of like car accidents. They're especially gory. There's a lot of blood and that kind of stuff. And this one, so I went from like the saddest suicide I've been at in a long time to one of the most traumatic and gory suicides I've been at in a long time. So it's broad daylight, side yard, traumatized neighbors, people that have, witnessed the trauma, including my officers. And it was pretty bad. And so we stayed through the end of that scene until the body was removed. And then I came back to the office because I'm a busy guy and I've got a lot of things to do. And I'm sitting here at the computer and I'm working away. And I think I actually, at some point in that afternoon, so I got finished, let's say, the first call was in the morning, second call was just about the same time, and I was done by noon. And so I'm here in the afternoon, and I think I actually said to myself at one point, I'm fine. That's exactly what my officers say to me. And I'm like, I know they're not fine. You just saw something horrible, or you witnessed the secondary trauma of someone else having witnessed the most horrible thing in their life. And of course that affects you. Those are two critical incidents. Those are a big deal. And so I said, all right, nuts. I'm going to have to take my own medicine because I tell my officers to go talk to somebody. And so,
but your officers are busy people too, aren't they?
Yeah, they are, and God bless them. There's so much about police work that lends itself to unhealthiness because they can't help it. They clear a call, and there's other calls pending, and so they need to go to somebody else's emergency, and there's no way to predict how it's going to go. I mean, it might be another terrible, death, or it could be, the neighbor played their radio too loud. It's kind of like gambling where there's no way to predict whether you're going to win or lose. And so you get to, if you're a gambler, you're always hoping you'll win on the next try. When you're a cop, you're always worried you'll lose and get one of those really bad calls each time. So back to that afternoon, I was in a position where I needed to talk to somebody. What I did is I called a chaplain that's been on the show before. And he's an LAPD officer, former LAPD officer, who's now a chaplain in Kansas City. And I called him and I said, hey, I've had two critical incidents this morning. I just need to talk about it. I said, I feel fine. I think I feel fine, but I know I need to do this. So let's talk about it. He asked me all the questions that I would ask an officer, how you eating, how you sleeping, how you feeling, to, work all the way through that. But then just talk through each incident. And I did what I just did with you. I gave, not too many details, but I just gave the basics. And this guy knows me well enough that he knows if I'm not being completely forthcoming. He knows me well enough to understand where my normal baseline is. And so he talked to me, and we spent probably 45 minutes or an hour talking about these two calls and examining, what I'm going to do that's going to be healthy and right and good, and what I'm going to watch in myself and that kind of thing. And then I hung up with him, and I called another chaplain.
Really?
Yeah, I called a guy who used to be a Washington, D.C. SWAT guy who's now a chaplain out in California, and I called him, and I walked through the exact same conversation. And both of those, I did not do that because I felt bad that day. I did it because I know that if I take those things and stuff them down, they're going to come out in behaviors that I can't control years from now.
So you're trying to be proactive.
Exactly. So it's not that I felt bad that day. That's not why I called. I called because I don't want to feel bad 10 years from now. And that's what I want my officers to understand. I don't feel like the older officers in our department have had good support in this regard. I don't think that they have had consistent support in this regard. I think they've mostly been told to be old school and just tough it out. You signed up for this. You just stuff it down and move on and compartmentalize and all those things. And that's not always good advice. I think God made us to story tell our trauma. And it's healthy for us to articulate it and to get it out, and it loses some of its control over us. It loses its ability to be buried down deep and fester and come up in some way that we're not expecting years later if we talk it out. And it doesn't have to be with a psychologist or psychiatrist. It doesn't have to be through EAP or even peer support. I didn't go to anybody in our department. When I felt I needed to talk, I actually talked to two guys, one of which was like 4 states away from me. But I talked to people who were outside because that's just what I personally felt comfortable doing. And we were able to, to get that out and to prevent it from being a problem several years from now.
Because I think we've all seen examples in our lives of the negative effects that people have when they experience trauma at some point, and then it it affects them in really, really bad ways 10, 20, 30 years down the road. And that could be someone who was a victim of abuse, or it could be someone who, experienced a really gruesome, traumatic war or crime scene after crime scene, or, any of these examples, right?
The average civilian, and I don't know if these numbers are accurate. I think it sounds true. And so whoever first put this out there, it had the sound of authenticity. But it said that civilians are only going to really experience, 3 or 4 traumatic, critical incidents in their entire lifetime, where a police officer might average like 800 over the course of their career. They basically, their job is to go from one person's worst day ever to the next person's worst day ever. And so not all officers have a number that high, but many of them have dozens and dozens and dozens they've lost track of.
Way more than your average person.
Way more than average. And because of the busyness, there's not the natural, the police officers are all going to go back to the station and they're going to talk through it. And they do write reports. And I actually think that's healthy, that they have to put it into words, even if it's just the facts and not how they feel. They put it into words. And I think that's actually a good exercise. I mean, I'd hate to imagine what it would be like if that wasn't the case. If something like artificial intelligence here in the future were to write your reports for you, I think officers would actually lose a therapeutic tool that they've had for ages that they didn't maybe value very much. And granted, not on all cases, not everybody writes a report. Sometimes you'll have one person write a report and others write like supplements. And so they're all participating in that exercise, but sometimes it's just one person writing.
So your impetus behind sharing this story with your officers is to tell them, I myself am an example. You need to be talking to people. You need to take the time. Don't just keep staying busy, go from task to task to task. You need to work through the experiences you're having, the critical incidents, the trauma. And it doesn't have to be, like you said, with a licensed therapist or psychologist. No. It needs to be with people that you trust. And for some people, that might be their spouse. For other people, that might be their minister or someone at their church or place of worship, or it just might be someone older than them or who has stepped in the shoes that they've been in before. Maybe it's a retired officer, or you had friends through your network that you don't even see them every day, but you just know them and know that they're willing to listen and just let you say what you need to say, so that way it doesn't affect you, like you said, years down the road.
This was about a month ago. Do you remember me talking about this?
I do, actually. I remember specifically the fact that you came across that first incident, hadn't even been called out to it, and then had another one. And I'm sure you were really tired after that. I mean, that's both a physically and emotionally draining day.
The reason I ask is because I gave those other 2 chaplains a different level of detail when I walked through it with them than I did with you. And so that talking to you was valuable to me, but I did adjust how much I said and to what level of detail, and you probably got more than you wanted.
So what you're telling me is your officers might do that too, like if they're talking with a loved one.
Exactly. You would adjust. If you have a spouse that does not work in this line, if he or she's not a first responder, you might not give all of the details that you would give to a fellow police officer. That would be different. And frankly, I would say age and personality and lots of other factors would adjust how much you share and to what detail you share. I'm pretty sure I talked to those 2 chaplains that same day, and then that week I talked to you and shared a probably more condensed version of it, which also helped me. And each time I've talked about it now with my different patrol stations where I've gone around from roll call to roll call, each one of those times it's been a little bit better for me. And I felt a little bit, I felt less like I was carrying less with me each time I talk to them. I think I'll feel better after putting this on the podcast. So it's something that works. It's something that all of us need to do, but we need to make it a habit. And I can't fix the fact that a cop's been a cop for 20 or 25 years and never really had a lot of encouragement to do this or never had a lot of opportunity to do this. But we can't change that for people who are coming out of the academy now, where we could normalize it and come alongside those younger officers, say, hey, I know we got to go to the next call, but you are going to talk to someone about this, right? And you're going to find an appropriate person, and you're going to share an appropriate level of detail, and you're going to storytell what you've seen and what you've been through, and you're going to do this, right? And that could become normal for them so that 25 years from now, they can honestly say, yes, every time we had a really bad critical incident, we talked about it. And I feel pretty resilient having done that.
And of course, we don't just mean you need to talk about it, only if you experience, a dead body or something like that. Like there's lots of different trauma that's really good for you to talk
splattered
through
everywhere in order for it to be something worth talking about.
Because I'm not a law enforcement officer, and so I don't think I've yet hit my cap of 4 traumatic incidents that your normal average person experiences in their life. I had my own experiences of, trauma or things that I just don't love, and I feel like they're burdensome, and I'm carrying around baggage with me. I can remember.
I think you're selling yourself short, because I know that you do ministerial work where you're counseling with people and you're helping people through some of the worst stuff in their life. And there's no way that doesn't bleed over onto you. You're carrying a whole lot of stuff. People dump their garbage into your trash can. You carry around a pretty full trash can.
Yeah, that can happen. I remember I had one particular day where I just had call after people sitting in my office and counseling with them. I mean, I had almost 4 consecutive hours of conversations with people. And I like talking, but there's a certain type of conversation that just is emotionally draining.
Yeah, but people's burdens and the difficult dilemmas that there's no easy fix to, that's hard to carry with somebody.
For sure. And my point in bringing that up is that day, I went home and debriefed with my wife, and we told our little boy that he needed to go play downstairs and we were going to have some adult time. He protested. He said, no, I want in on adult time. And I said, no, we need a moment to just talk. And I was so emotionally drained and exhausted. I just laid on our bed. I just needed to lay down for a minute. I just told my wife, here's the gist of them, and I'm going to be okay. But I just needed to say it out loud, and I felt better, and I felt lighter because of that.
Yeah. And I think everybody's got somebody that they can trust. You have to protect confidentiality and the legal process and all of those things. But you can generalize and not share all the nitty-gritty details and then still get your story out and unburden yourself of all of the weight you're carrying. That is still an achievable thing with any number of different people in your life.
Absolutely. And my hope is that, those difficult days when they pop up, whether it's for a civilian or for a law enforcement officer, that doesn't turn around to, kind of bite them years down the road. And hopefully that'll be the case for all of us if we just take the time to share, to debrief, and to get it off of our chest.
Absolutely. There are several ways that you can help this podcast. Maybe the most important way is to share this podcast with other people. That is how podcasts grow. When people make a recommendation, say, hey, I listened to the Hey Chaplain podcast. Have you ever heard of it? Let me show you on your phone where to find it. That personal recommendation from you is going to be the best way for this show to continue to grow and to get bigger and bigger. So please, if you find an episode that you particularly enjoy, tell other people about it. If you liked it, they'll like it. Please let other people know about the show. And don't assume that they already know. I just had a humbling experience. I was at the FBI National Academy Associates Conference, and I've always just assumed that the word about Hey Chaplain has really gotten out there, that lots of people are familiar, but dozens of times I was speaking to somebody about police wellness, about chaplaincy, and I said, like on the show Hey Chaplain, and they had no idea. They'd never heard of it before. So I got plenty of practice that week telling people for the first time about Hey Chaplain. Another thing you can do is post on social media. I don't think that conservative shows that support law enforcement probably get very much traction from the algorithms, But ultimately, if you keep sharing Facebook posts and Instagram posts, that's going to add up. I mean, they're not going to just completely ignore you. So share it online. Let people know on social media that you listen to Hey Chaplain. But really, that personal face-to-face interaction and recommendation, that's the best way. And I don't think that's ever going to change. Now, over the last 4 years, I've done almost all of this out of my own pocket. And I've had to buy recording equipment, and I will sometimes travel to represent the show at conferences and conventions and that kind of thing. I have paid for subscriptions to online services and to host the show on the internet. A lot of different expenses over time, and some of those are coming back around again. That makes me so incredibly grateful to the people who donated to the show through buymeacoffee.com. That $5 donation, and some of them $5 or $10 a month donation, that helps so much. It pays for all those monthly subscriptions, and eventually I can even build up money to buy a new microphone or pay for something for a convention table. I just bought a new sign and a new tablecloth, and that stuff just really begins to add up, which makes it so meaningful when people are willing to partner. And even when it is just a $5 donation, those add up. And that becomes a significant way to partner with me as I try to put encouraging stories in front of tens of thousands of police officers all around the world. So if you would consider going to buymeacoffee.com/HeyChaplain, that's the current way that you're able to make a small donation to the show. So let people know about the show. Buy me a $5 coffee if you get a chance. And thank you so much for listening to Hey Chaplain. And as always, pray for peace in our city.